Welcome to another episode of the Ask a Cycling Coach podcast presented by TrainerRoad. This is episode 432, I think, Ivy. It's kind of crazy.
Nice.
Back from Single Track 6, I'm Coach Jonathan Lee, and we have with us Santa Cruz Hit Squad's Tobin Ortenblad. Tobin, stoked to have you with us here. It's going to be a good time.
Thanks for having me. I know we've talked about this for a while, but never made it happen for some reason.
Finally.
Yeah.
So stoked.
Yeah.
I know. It'll be good times. And, of course, we also have Venton Bikes and TrainerRoad's Ivy Audrain.
Hey.
Ivy, we brought Tobin on because, and we'll say it right now, Cross is coming. It's August as of recording this, or close to August. We're getting close. And that's the sort of time where a lot of you are actually sending in questions about cyclocross stuff. We're going to get into some cyclocross questions, but also Tobin races the Lifetime Grand Prix with the Santa Cruz Hit Squad, in addition to his background really coming from primarily in cyclocross and still races cyclocross. Ivy, you race cyclocross, so we're going to talk about some cross stuff. But before we do that, Gabriel sent in a question that's appropriate for Tobin, because Tobin, you race the Downieville Classic, which is a famous mountain bike race here. And Gabriel wrote in, and his question says, I race the Downieville Classic All Mountain Challenge. It's a race where you do cross country on the first day, right, Tobin? And then DH the next day, and then you take the overall?
Yep, and it's a point system, not a time system, which is important to note.
Yeah. Gabriel says, trained specific for this event since January. The execution of my plan resulted in cramping badly 70 minutes after the start, almost to the top of the initial climb. And yes, this race just starts with a climb that lasts for most folks, it's going to last for anywhere between like an hour and a half. That's like, it just doesn't end, right, Tobin?
Yeah, it does not. It just doesn't stop. It gets steeper a bit at the top too.
Yeah. And you're exposed to heat the whole time?
Wide open, no shade. I mean, there's bits of shade at the bottom, and then you're just on a bench cut into this hillside. And yeah, I mean, it's ripping hot, and it was particularly hot last weekend to make matters worse.
Oof.
Yeah, I think it starts at just under 5,000 feet and climbs up to almost 7,000 feet. Is that correct?
Let's see. I forget exactly. I think that Downieville itself is like 2,800 or 3,000. Because right as you leave town, you see that 3,000 foot sign. I think Sierra City might even be a little bit above 4. I don't think it's quite 5, but it is. It's just I think it's more like 4. So you go from 4 to 7,500, and in one step. There's no middle bits in that climb where it's flat or even downhill.
So I think that's somewhere around like an 1,100 meter climb that you do, which is pretty substantial. So, okay. So the execution of my plan resulted in cramping badly 70 minutes after the start, almost to the top of the initial climb. And this made me struggle for the rest of the day by trying to find positions on the bike that would limit the cramping and not stopping. Standing on pedals for short sprints were out of the question. And after that climb, Tobin, it's just a really long descent back down to town, right? With occasional hard, punchy climbs.
Yeah. And it's you basically climb all the way up, and then it's descending immediately, and it's really the top bit of that descent is quite chunky. It's really, really rocky. So your position it's not like it's very dynamic, right? Your seat post is up, your seat post is down, sharp rocks, sharp drops, flats, turns. It's got really everything. I'm assuming he had a dropper, because I think everyone in that race does for the most part, which we can get into later. But having a dropper puts you in all kinds of different positions that you don't play with when you're at home training. You're probably not playing with your dropper when you're super fatigued, like coming out of the bottom when you're all the way dropped to go up to full extension is like a micro squat. And you do it over and over and over again, and that can cause a lot of problems too.
The way that we've talked about that before, Tobin, is like, imagine getting to the end of like the finish line and like, okay, before you can actually log your finish time, do 76 air squats, because that's what you would have done with the dropper post, you know?
Yeah. It's like, exactly. And you kind of like, effect. I never thought about it before until last time I did Downieville in 2019, and I noticed some, like, I was feeling crampy. And I noticed a couple of times it was coming off of my low seat position, because, like you said, it's an air squat, and you got to push up from that. It's something you don't think about it when you're doing it, but you've already done it. Who knows how many times up at the top of the course, and then it's just, cumulative fatigue.
Yeah, for sure. Gabriel goes on to mention that the goal was to finish in 2 hours and 50 minutes, and the strategy was to pace myself at 80% of FTP during that climb, given the altitude and heat, so that I could have enough energy to go smooth through the technical downhill sections in the middle. So this is all super smart pacing, right?
Very smart, yeah.
And push hard on the last 5 miles, which are pretty flat with enough room to pass. And in this case, actually, Gabriel, fantastic job on the pacing. Ivy, I don't know if you've seen the ride file here, but Gabriel started out around 0.9, but worked their way down to 0.8 and just kind of held 0.8, really darn close to it, and very impressive pacing. So that was well done, well executed. So Gabriel mentions I started hard on the first 15 minutes at 90% FTP, was slowly ramping down to the MP of 80%. A few minutes before that is when the first cramp happened. But once cramping started, the strategy just turned into survival mode. I went in and out of cramps all throughout the rest of the day, although I ended up with a good time of 2:58. So that's pretty, when you talk about cramps derailing your day and being that close to your goal time, well done. My RPE, though, was off the charts, and I have to say it left me pretty disappointed and scarred for the next days.
Yeah, I'm looking at Gabriel's calendar now, and there's just rest week was just nothing, and now just has a couple weeks, just no workouts on there. Just needs to emotionally recoup from this experience.
Yeah, exactly.
I feel that.
Yeah, for sure. So some facts for the day, and there's some red flags in here. Ivy, maybe you can go through and point out any that you see first, and then Tobin, you can run through and point some out too.
Yeah, okay, so take a closer look in here.
Yeah, and Gabriel, to be clear too, it seems like trains around sea level. So sea level up to 2,000 feet are the biggest climbs, but in most cases it's going to be sea level-ish. So that's where the adaptation is to low elevation.
Right, and I'm curious to know, Jonathan. I think a lot of our red flags overlap, but I'm curious to know if Gabriel, a lot of those folks that live at sea level go up higher to train riding XC and riding trail and stuff, and so I wonder if Gabriel does that. But just doing those isolated training days isn't enough to get any real, adaptation to riding elevation. So I do think elevation played a role. Do you think?
Yeah, I agree, and kind of like you said, it's not going to give you the adaptation, but Tobin, you've been public about your struggles with elevation, and lucky for you raced the Lifetime Grand Prix, which loves to race in elevation. There's something though. Is there something to be said for you, Tobin, you typically train at sea level? When you go up to elevation and you just get familiar with it, is there a familiarity aspect that helps you on race day, or how do you approach getting used to elevation?
Yeah, it's a good question. I really struggle with it for sure, because I think Gabriel's in Los Gatos and I'm in Santa Cruz, so those are basically almost neighboring towns. You kind of got to reevaluate your plan. Like, everyone wants to go in and be like, I'm going to compete, I'm going to be at the front, I'm going to do what I do. But if you're not an altitude person, something I've learned over the past few years is when it's not your strength, like climbing at altitude or whatever, you really do have to just settle into an effort that you think you can do. And then it's almost like just check your ego and you just do this pace, and it's slow, it is slow, and it's not what you are capable of at sea level, but you have to accept that. And then that's what I do. And then eventually you just kind of hope that a bunch of these other people were out there just punching above their pay grade, and you'll catch them. Because that does happen at altitude. Everyone knows when you blow at altitude, you really don't come back, or you don't recover quick. I'm
glad that Keegan hasn't gaslit you into thinking that altitude isn't real, because I feel like that's when people just pretend that they're tougher than, air, and they try to do that and go way too hard.
Oh, he certainly tried. I'm sure
he always tries.
But yeah, I think that speaks to how important it is to be familiar with riding at RPE. Do you think that's accurate, Tobin, to know how to gauge your effort like that?
Totally, because exactly. You just ramp up to you feel like you hit your max pretty immediately. And or another thing to be weary of is if you are pacing with power, which it looks like he was, just hitting. I'm trying to think. thinking of a number that a power number that you feel like you can sustain, and trying to ramp up to that number and just get there, because what you're really going to want to do is like the race is going to be going away from you, and you're going to be, next thing you know, you're doing your sea level threshold and or above, and then that's what kills you slowly, and then you can't even hold that, that like steady baseline. So like I said, it's like really just kind of like letting people go, settling at what you can do, and calling their bluff. Like a lot of these people are going to blow, and just you'll pass them.
So in this case, they should drop roughly, it varies from person to person, but you should expect about a 7% drop in your FTP going from Los Gatos, where you're training at sea level, up to Downieville. And that's for the base elevation. And then as you go up higher and higher, you can expect a decrement, even higher. We're talking for at the top of that climb, which is, once again, a substantial climb. We're talking as much as 14% that you should expect. So your power should just drop. And in this case, that would put their power, they should have paced somewhere around like 205 watts, or actually, I take that back, around 195 watts over the course of that. And they did 206 average. But then if you look at the normalized that they did for that climb, it's 214. But the big part is that doesn't take into account the start. If you look at the first, right here, I'm looking at the first 20 minutes of the climb. And yeah, the first 20 minutes of the climb, your power was substantially higher than that. So this is a situation where if you take the elevation out of it, you basically started out at 110% of your FTP, which is like a VO2 effort, a low VO2 effort, and you held that for the first 20 minutes. And then at that point, of course, everything's going to get tougher. Your muscle fibers are just going to be like, what in the world are you doing to me? I'm not used to this. And as a result, any little thing is likely going to set them off toward a cramp. So yeah, I definitely think elevation played a role, in particular how it combines with pacing.
And starting with that effort there, the race starts on pavement. That road eventually turns to dirt. And I, about 20 minutes, experienced what, I went into the day thinking we're going to start at 9:30. It's going to be warm, but it's not going to be super hot yet. But it was right about that 15-20 minute mark where I was like, oh my, it's quite hot. It's already quite hot. It's only going to get worse from here. And I noticed that 10 to 20 minutes in. So, starting that hard and then feeling that heat is going to be kind of a double whammy. That being said, to almost contradict what I've said about pacing earlier, there are kind of parts of races where you do have to kind of try to commit to making a group or something. Mm-hmm. And, even though it's altitude and you're punching above your pay grade, there is a bit of maybe drafting early on. So you got to try to make the group or whatever situation there is early on. And then, if you feel like you can't do it, then back it off. But I'm contradicting what I said earlier. But sometimes you gotta kind of pin it to try to make that selection and then do what you can do.
Yeah, it makes sense, Tobin. Imagine training all year for something and getting to the race day and being like, I'm going to drop myself from this group that I want to be racing with because they're going exactly 10 watts higher than I want to be doing. Sometimes you got to just roll the dice and try it,
Exactly.
And then the hard part is, and to express the give and take that you're talking about, Tobin, and Ivy, you'll agree with this, is at these mass start events, because Gabriel started with Tobin, right? And started with Keegan, and started with Alexis Scarda and Katarina Nash, and all these super fast athletes. And everybody goes too hard in the beginning. In fact, hilariously, I saw a photo of the front group being patrolled, and I was like, Keegan and Tobin, Alex Wild, Cole Patton, they're all at the front. And then there were a handful of amateurs that were sprinting ahead of them. And I was like, what in the world? Where these people are colorblind because they have not seen the mass of red flags that would have been waving at them to go past the entire field and a stack of pros and think that was a good idea, right? Everybody goes too hard in the beginning, and you do have to have a mark that you're committed to be like, okay, this is a bridge too far and I can't do this because this is going to compromise the rest of my race, particularly for us amateurs. Like Gabriel said in this case, it's like the goal was to do a time. The goal wasn't to hang with anybody in particular. So if your goal is to finish at a specific time, then it's all about you pacing to the best of your ability. And that's like absolutely a situation where we have to kind of separate how the pros are doing things, or how people that are going for a specific position relative to others versus people going for a time. You really have to change the way you do it, and you have to, you know, be conservative on your pacing. But I like, and you probably lose perspective, right, Ivy, in the beginning of a race, like in terms of whatever feels hard. It suddenly in the beginning of a race, like even extremely hard doesn't feel so hard until it really absolutely feels hard.
You're gassed up and stoked, and RPE is just like null at that point. You're just like, try to stay with that group. I get it. Yeah. We all do it. Okay, so heat, I think Tobin absolutely is a factor. Very dry conditions too, in terms where this race is, and that's a unique type of heat that where, you know, your body won't be quite used to it, and you'll think, oh no, I'm totally fine because it's not humid or don't feel it. Then suddenly you're just cooking in the sun and you're frying like an egg on that really long, hard climb. So I could see heat being there. But listen to this. The nutrition part is crazy here. So on one respect, Gabriel, fantastic job. I'm quite impressed. On the other side of things, I think there were some mistakes that were made. So throughout the race, and the race ended up being 2 hours and 58 minutes long, so roughly 3 hours. Throughout the race, I drank a total of 96 ounces or 3 liters with 21 scoops of Scratch High Carb Mix. That comes up to 300 grams of carbs, and had a 30-gram gel at minute 120. So that's about 110 grams of carbs an hour, which is, for average athletes, a high amount. Gabriel, if you were used to this and this was just normal and this is what you do all the time, then that's one thing. If you weren't used to this, then that sort of thing, even if it doesn't give you gut distress, sometimes it just kind of halts your body's process of breaking down food. And you may not notice it in terms of bubble guts or a stomach ache or anything else, but you might just not be using a lot of what you're putting down the hatch just because it's, you know, you're overloading the system. They then consumed an element pack of 1,000 milligrams of sodium, and they did this 1 hour prior to the race, which for me, that's a lot of sodium just before the race. I typically try to take it like the night before, then a few hours before in the morning, I'll sip on electrolytes, but I'm not going to like take in 1,000 milligrams right before the race, like an hour before. And then took 2 salty stick capsules at minute 71, very specific, after the cramps, and then 2 more at minute 120. So it's fair to say that Gabriel took in a lot of sodium and a lot of carbohydrates. In fact, to me, it kind of seems like a little too much sodium. That's at least from my perspective. It would seem like a little too much. And I know I've said that you just sweat it out, but this is kind of like an extreme, where in this, I have taken in like tons of sodium before, just testing out sodium loading strategies. I just felt, I did not feel good. And I don't know, I don't have any science to back up why, but I have noticed that when I take in too much sodium. I don't know. What do you two think?
I haven't pushed over like the sodium thing too heavily to be, I haven't gone to the extreme end of putting a ton in. So I really can't speak to that, to be honest. I mean, something I'd recommend for like Gabriel is like those, there's like a Gatorade sweat patch where you can test your sweat. And I mean, I don't think they're like crazy accurate, but they're probably fairly accurate, you know, plus or minus 100 milligrams, maybe 200. But ideally, I think you're doing a quick and dirty test like that just to see ballpark where you are. Because I work with Never Second, and the owner and I were talking about just what an average athlete needs, which is about 600 milligrams of sodium. So
per hour.
Yeah. So, you know, some of these numbers are significantly higher than that. And I don't know what, like putting in a little bit extra is probably not too big of a deal, but I do think you should probably be shooting for about your optimal load and not just dumping it in because you have a cramp or it's a big race or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Ivy, what are your thoughts?
I was
on
just
that
looking
with
up
the carbs and everything.
how much sodium is in a serving of Scratch Labs also.
Yeah, and the salty sticks as well.
Yeah.
Which is quite a lot.
I'm
I'll look up the salty
impressed.
sticks.
I mean, I found as an amateur, I mean, Gabe, I don't know how long you've been racing, but I'm impressed with actually how much food you were able to put in. That was something I really struggled with when I was younger and new, is like just going so hard and not even keeping track of time. And all of a sudden, it's been 90 minutes and like you haven't put in anything. And then you're behind on fueling and you can't catch up once you're behind. So good work getting that all down in that race, because it sucks on the climbs. You're going really hard. Then the rest of it's really technical single track. So it's really hard to get your hands off the bars to put anything, to eat anything. So very impressed with the volume of nutrition.
Yeah, not only that, Ivy, sorry, before you go into the sodium, I'll just on that note from Tobin, I'll read the breakfast too. I had a big breakfast.
Is incredible.
Cold oat pudding, 2 pancakes, 1 banana, 1 English muffin, 1 egg, a slice of bacon, and I ate this only 90 minutes prior to the start. So that's like a big red flag to me too, Ivy, right? Like 90 minutes before, I wouldn't be able to digest that beforehand. You?
No, absolutely not. Yeah. At least, like, maybe if I'm really tired, like, Tobin, I don't know how you guys wake up at 4 in the morning. Like, couldn't be me. This is why I hate gravel. Like, I want to do cross and sleep until 11 and then be like, oh, I guess I'll race today. And like, but yeah, that's a huge red flag too. Like 90 minutes is not enough, especially when I'm sure Gabriel warmed up a little bit, considering that climb happened right away. He probably started riding like, and less than an hour
45
after
minutes,
eating
an
that
hour
enormous breakfast.
Yeah. And that's going to make it so that while you're riding, it's just really not going to, when you would be digesting and breaking down that food and making it so that your body can utilize it effectively. If you're spinning or riding around or anything else, you're impairing that, right? So that makes it even tougher. Sorry, Ivy, go ahead.
That's okay. There are, in 1 scoop of Scratch Labs, there are 380 milligrams of sodium.
380.
Dear me.
That times 21.
Oh my gosh. 7,980 plus 1,000 before.
Brother.
Plus the salt sticks, which are even... It's like, my man was McDonald's fries. Like, that's a lot. That's a lot.
I think the only time I feel sodium overload is on really long road trips when I house an entire bag of sunflower seeds.
I've seen you snack in the car.
You've seen it. And it just like I totally it has an effect for like a couple days for me. I feel like just kind of like puffy and sluggish, and so I don't really have any like scientific experience about what happens when you take in too much sodium, but that just seems like a lot. Like there's no way that you can absorb all that at some point, and right?
I would love to get Andy Blow back on the podcast again from Precision Hydration, and maybe we can talk about, because man, it's changed. Last time we had him on was like 2-3 years ago, and that was when people were really starting to talk about this whole concept of like, maybe I can take in 1,000 milligrams, like more than just like, 300 milligrams of sodium, maybe all the way up to 1,000. And it's really changed. Like people take in so much more now. So maybe we can talk to him about taking in like really excessive amounts like this and what it would actually do. Cause that's a really good point, Ivy. Mm-hmm. Like I feel the same. I feel bloated and like not race ready. That's for darn sure,
I feel like too, sometimes you gotta maybe find a drink mix that, there's a lot of different drink mixes out there. So finding one that has like a carb number and a sodium number that are complementary. Like if you're trying to get a ton of carbs and you start, if you're trying to get a ton of carbs, I'll talk about it in there in a second, just because it's what I know. Sure. These come in 30 gram. The packets have the scoop, or a packet has 30 grams of carbs and 200 milligrams of sodium. So there's called a C30 and a C90. The 90 only has 200 milligrams of caffeine or 200 milligrams of sodium. So if I want 90 grams of carbs, I can dump that in my bottle and only have 200 milligrams of sodium. And then I could add some sodium if I wanted. But it's important to find a mix that you can be stacking a carbohydrate number and a sodium number. Because what looks like what happened with the scratch is like, it might have been shooting for like that carb number, but as they were doing that, they were also stacking that sodium number in there with every scoop added, and it just got kind of out of control. So yeah, looking at these, what's that?
Oh, just like, which is a good use for something like a gel too. Like SAS gels have like 20 something grams of carbs and only like 10 grams of sodium, because it's not supposed to be about sodium for
milligrams
those.
of sodium.
Sorry.
Really
Sorry.
small.
Whoa. Yeah.
10 grams. You ripping.
So I don't know. So maybe something to look at there with like maybe a more how you're stacking your mix and what you're actually when you're putting multiple scoops of something in, looking at that the nutrition stats and seeing if you've stacked a bunch of sodium with your carbs. Whether you want that or you don't want that, it's something to be looking out for.
Tobin, do you
That's
feel
why
like
I like to keep those two separate. Like I like to be able to do carbs and then sodium separate, because that way, if I really do need to take in a bunch of liquid or I need to take in something else, like it's not going to blow all the other proportions out of balance.
Yeah, exactly. And on a hot day, maybe on a hot day you want to lean out that mix so it's a lot more water in your bottle than mix. I don't know, we're probably getting to this. But on like a hot day, I'd be more inclined to put gels in my pocket and then less mix in my bottle, because I can always make up the carbs with the gels, but then I'm not stuck drinking like a really rich mix that's got more water in it. So I can add carbs and sodium via gel and then wash it down and stay hydrated with just like a lighter mix.
Yeah, I wonder if Gabriel had between bottles and a hydration pack 3 liters, or like stopped at an aid station or something. But either way, with that much mix in, oh man, it would just be like syrup. It would bum me out so much if it was hot to just have highly concentrated sugar syrup. Yeah, bummer.
Yeah. This is, I don't know about the science behind this or anything else, but I trust the source from Dr. Podlegar, Tim Podlegar. He's one of the head researchers, really like one of the foremost researchers right now on the food that we can take in as athletes that makes us faster on the bike, to put it in like common terms. And he said the other day, because he was putting himself, so he is the team like nutritionist or dietitian for, or the sports nutritionist, I believe, for Bora Hansgrohe, that team, or just Bora. I can't remember if their name is just Bora now. But anyways, for that pro team. And before the tour, or before a portion of the tour, he was doing his own event, and he mentioned that it was really hot. And as a result, he dropped down to 80 grams an hour instead of over 100 grams an hour. And the reason for that was he said that even though his body is burning more calories to manage the heat, your body, at least according to him, your body isn't able to process and utilize as much of the fuel that you give it in hot conditions. And as a result, he was taking in less to avoid gut distress. It's like, that's why, man, heat sucks. Like, not only does it hurt your performance, cause more energy drain, but it also stops you from being able to process more energy, according to that, So, and once again, let's just say Gabriel's used to, putting down 110 grams an hour, but suddenly it's super hot. Suddenly it's at elevation. It's a different environment. And then as a result, now Gabriel's in this spot where they've overloaded their body from breakfast with carbohydrates and sodium and everything else. And as a result, it's just turned off, not a whole lot is going on in terms of turning energy that they've eaten into energy to be used by those muscles, and you get kind of stopped up. So yeah, I could see that.
I think the starting the day with that much food was not great. And that close to the start was not great. Like a 2.5, traditionally it's like 2.5, 3 hours before is when you want to like finish that big meal. And I mean, that's a really big meal. Like muffins have a lot in them. Bananas pretty basic, but 2 pancakes, oatmeal, and eggs and bacon, like that's crazy. It's just so much food. So I think just that volume of food that close to the start was like maybe the first mistake. I don't want to sound like too critical, but probably the first mistake of that race day. Instead of just like waking up maybe a little bit earlier, having that big meal 2.5 hours before, and then just chilling, sitting around, and then kind of hitting your warm up, and then, in your warm up, then start to be drinking, sipping on mix and everything. But yeah, I think a lot of things were done really well, and then the fueling was probably maybe the nail in the coffin for the day.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I could see that too. Ivy, do you have any other thoughts on this one?
Just that Gabriel's a champ for having such a hard time with cramps and still having a great finish time. That's awesome.
Way to go, making it through. The one thing that I would say is for a race like this, and this is where workout alternates can come in handy. Like, this is a unique race in the sense that you can't stop pedaling. It's not like you're in a road race where it's like you might catch some coasting, or in a typical mountain bike race or something else where like you'll have moments of like this one, you just pedal nonstop for that first climb. And Gabriel, you did a good job of using Plan Builder, and it laid out more like sustained work. You did cross country marathon for this one. So I think that you're good in your case, but I would just recommend to athletes, when you look at the race and you look at the profile, if you're going to have something like this that's just like really stable work and you have threshold or VO2 intervals, you can use alternates to find ones that are longer, more sustained efforts. And I think that it will go a long way to helping you prepare for this. Gabriel did a good job of doing that in their training, looking back over the past since January of doing longer events or longer efforts. But yeah, anyways, that's what I would say.
And I guess one more thing about Downieville is like it's hard to train. It's really hard to train that event because your leg fitness, your fitness is pretty like leg specific. We're pedaling all day. There's not many times where you are pushing a descent for 45 minutes to an hour where you are using your entire body. Like Downieville, for me, I do ride a fair bit of trail bikes at home, but we have 3-4 minute fast descents. Like a descent that long, you're using a lot of upper body. You're using arms, shoulders, core, legs, back. Everything's turned on and active. And then again, like I said, having that dropper to throw in another level of like fully seated to fully extended. All these things really beat you down in a race that long, even though you don't necessarily think about it because you are descending, but it's a chunky descent, and it wears you out, even though you're not necessarily on the pedal super hard. So something to think about there too.
What's harder, Tobin, Downieville or Unbound?
Unbound.
Understandably.
Okay.
Yeah.
Forever.
Yeah. Were you super sore after Downieville?
I wasn't like super sore, but I just noticed shoulders and like pecs, and my back was a bit sore. A lot of people were like, "Oh, my back's so sore," which is probably just a from standing, descending. And it's bumpy too. So all the stabilizers are turned on, and that's mountain bike. And then a couple of times too, if you slide and you got to dab and catch yourself, like that super quick motion can like force a cramp. I kind of had that up top, like I dabbed and I'd unclip and like catch myself, and my leg just like locked for a second. I was like, when else are you going to get that? You're not going to get that in a road race, or, you get it in all these you do get that in other races, but you're not as fatigued, which is kind of the difference with Downieville.
You just brought up a really good point that I didn't think of, and you said it, but I just want to put it in more like literal terms. Your muscles get used to working in specific ways, and at Downieville, like the descending being so long and everything else, it's a very unique sort of stimulus, and as a result, you can expect cramps. And as an example of this, I went back east and did a race with my friends, and it was a 50-mile mountain bike race. But it was on constant routes, and it was raining, and it was like roots and slippery rocks, East Coast sort of stuff. And to constantly be pedaling but trying to hold traction for that long completely destroyed my legs. The power wasn't that high, but it was because I was working those like stabilizer muscles constantly while I'm pedaling to try to fight for traction. It made, it takes 200 watts and makes it feel like 280 watts. And and my muscles were just fried. And I was dealing with cramps toward the end of that race because I wasn't used to that. I wasn't used to riding on slick roots and rocks and having to fight for traction. In this case too, it's not an ideal climbing surface, right, Tobin? Like it's got rock that you're dealing with and it's loose and you're fighting for traction in spots. And who knows, with Gabriel might have also been taking subpar lines to pass people on that climb, right? So then you're taking the bad line and you're dealing with even worse traction. All that stuff it's like little mini distractions for your muscles that have to work in a slightly different way. And it all adds up and takes a toll at the end.
Yeah.
So yeah, absolutely. Ivy, should we jump into some short ones and we can jump back into a couple long questions? What do you say?
Sounds good. There's some good ones here for Tobin. I love this. Tobin, in your opinion, who would win at Crusher in a race of Sepp, Kuss v. Keegan?
Sepp versus Keegan?
Yeah.
Ooh, that's a good one. I think Sepp grew up racing mountain bikes, actually. So Sepp is no slouch on the bike handling, as we've seen multiple times. Man, I don't know. I hate to make. I think that would be a good race. I think that. I don't know. Does Keegan probably is going to listen to this, isn't he?
He listens. He's
Totally
listening.
going to listen. He submitted questions for you. Even he was very happy.
Wow.
You were on,
okay.
so,
Well, I think that honestly, I think that'd be a super good race. I think that. I think Sepp might be able to put some time into Keegan. I think Keegan would probably say the same, to be honest. I think Keegan's advantage would come ripping the descent. I know Sepp can also rip the descent, but Keegan really can hang it out there on a gravel bike. But then it's a huge climb back to the finish. I think Keegan would have a hard time probably getting Sepp on that day, especially with the current form. Sepp's probably in with the tour and everything. So sorry, Keegan.
I feel like Sepp is pure climb right now, right? Like for the past how many years?
I mean, Sepp was almost top 10 in the tour. Like he could have been, right? If he was riding for himself, he would very easily be a top 10 in the tour. And it's easy to write off those guys in 9th and 10th because they're not JV and Pogo, but like that's an unfathomably, it's so fast. Like 9th, 10th in the tour is like that. You can't even fathom how fast those guys are really going.
Yeah. Amen.
Cool.
I agree with Tobin.
Sorry, Keegan.
I'll come out and say it. Keegan, you'd lose. So.
All right, Tobin,
see if that fires him up to come on the podcast.
All right, Tobin, your favorite / best snacks to bring on the bike.
Okay, so we were just talking a lot about nutrition.
Plug Never Second. I love Never Second. Buy Never Second today.
I know. No, I'm not going to do that. But when I'm not like sticking to the strategy or whatever for the day, I actually really like Swedish fish. I feel like I can be really coming unglued and like just eat like just a handful of Swedish fish and like 10, 15 minutes later, like I feel good. So I've been digging Swedish fish lately. And dates. I do like dates a lot too.
Oh, nice.
So those are my two. Nothing too special. But and when it's really hot, a Slurpee at 7-Eleven. I love a Slurpee in the middle of a ride.
So good.
Scientifically backed to drop core temperature better than anything else. So
exactly.
I've been doing something.
Swedish fish dates. Sorry.
Nice. That's okay. I've been doing the most unhinged thing, which is I got these little these little 1 ounce Nalgene cups, like the camping things you get at REI, little like tiny cups, and then I load them in vertically with cornichons, the little tiny pickles,
and
then like top it off with brine and freeze it overnight, and then put it in my frame bag. Yeah, I freeze it and then put it in my frame bag before the ride. And then like halfway through the ride when it's 90 degrees and I'm cooking, they just have finally finished thawing out and they're still cold and a little crunchy. And it's just like...
I've seen this. I've
so
seen
nice.
You do this before.
Yeah.
Okay, I do have one question. After the pickle's frozen, does it compromise the texture?
A little bit. I feel like if I leave them in there for too long and it gets past the point of being cold and the like brine and stuff starts to heat up, they start to get like not as crunchy, and that's a little bit of a bummer. But yeah, so you just got to be on top of it.
Got to have the snap and crisp of a pickle.
Yeah.
If it's not there, it's just not. Yeah, the experience is gone.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so good. I just get so bummed out eating sweet sugar stuff on the bike all day, and then it's hot out.
It's good to get some savory for sure.
Yeah.
I just want to see riders pull up with like these tiny little pickles now because of Ivy. Like show up to the line with tiny pickles. It'll be great. Yeah, it's awesome.
All right.
Tobin.
Tobin.
Want to cover like 2 more short ones and then we'll go and do another long?
Oh yeah, are we coming back to them, or do I have to pick the final 2 that I want?
Oh no, we'll come back to them. We'll finish all these.
Okay.
So we'll just, kind of intersperse, if you will, we'll give people intermission between these long ones. So
we did have, we asked folks to, submit questions about cyclocross for you, Tobin, because of your cross experience. Do you think dropper post belong on cyclocross race bikes? Yes or no?
I think it's not probably worth the weight penalty. Droppers are quite heavy. Our courses are not terribly gnarly here in the United States, and I think at the end of the day, if you're in like a proper cross race and you have to run a 33 millimeter tire, the tire is still your most limiting factor. Probably not have it like on like a gnarly descent or something. Like it's really sketchy because you're on that little tire. I think a dropper would make you feel a bit safer, like having that seat out of your way, and it would make barriers probably easier to hop, and you could probably ride a few features on certain courses maybe with it. But overall, I think that it is probably not really worth the penalty of weight. And it's also another thing that you need to be like thinking about in the race, like dropping the seat, putting the seat back up. Like it's kind of another control you got to think of. So I probably wouldn't run one. I haven't really seen any on the cross track either, but things are changing. So,
yeah.
But I don't think we're going to see those on the professional, at least on the pro stage, anytime soon.
Yeah. I think you nailed it. Just like the limiter for any sketchy or really steep descending sections is traction from your tires.
Yeah.
Not like, I could ride this faster if I could get behind the saddle more. Like it's just about tire traction. And I don't feel like not having a saddle in the way would really help with that. What do you think, John?
I'm going to disagree. Even though personally, I wouldn't use one. I think that the majority of people aren't nearly as good as you two. And as a result, even though, yes, like their tires cause the limiter, and that is the end limiter, they would be able to recover more in sections where possibly they could recover if they just had the saddle out of the way and felt more comfortable. Manage sections without as much energy consumption, and also keep their level of like arousal and like fear down. And I know that cyclocross courses aren't like Downieville. It's not like a gnarly DH, but they're, for the majority of cyclists that are out there doing cyclocross, they're so far from your level that having something like a dropper post, and especially like something like that new Explorer one from RockShox that's like lighter, smaller, or maybe the Fox like Transfer one, or Transfer SL, I think it's called. It's really light. Like if you have a really light dropper post on there, maybe you're removing some of that weight penalty, but then it just helps them feel so much more comfortable on the bike. And I also know that kind of like flies in the face of cyclocross, which the whole point is kind of to ride a bike that's not made for what you're doing.
To be underbiked,
yeah, that's like the whole point. But I do think that most people would probably be faster with one on a cross course, and when you're talking about average population.
I agree with what you've said, actually. That's a good perspective. Like, make things a little less scary by getting that seat out of the way. I do think that is very relevant and true.
Yeah. And it might make barriers hoppable for people that it would never be hoppable. Like that, it's just not an option. And like the barriers, even though when you look at it, it's, once again, for you, Ivy, when you're racing, like, you lose that wheel and you've lost. Like you really need to stay with the group. So for you, getting over the barriers in the most efficient way possible and at a certain speed is like a prerequisite. Whereas for a lot of average folks, it's really not about like, holding that wheel And if they go through a little slower, that's fine. But they still fixate on them so much because they're scary, right? And imagine if you weren't going around the entire course just like fearing barriers, and instead you could focus on each turn and give it its own space, and then you weren't overwhelmed by the barriers. So I think there's an opportunity for it, but I also see every argument for not using one too. But I'd like to see it change maybe and see because I showed up with a dropper post on my cross bike to cross races, and man, people were upset. Like they did not like it. And I was like, I was tearing down and not respecting the gods of cyclocross and, lots of bad stuff. But
cross
I
people
feel like
are
it's
purists
okay.
about stuff for sure. Like very
Oddly,
dogmatic.
yet at the same time,
yeah.
yeah, at the same time, they're all down with, taking shots of Fireball, but don't you dare bring a dropper post. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So,
that's true. I recently rode, I put a fork, a Rudy on my gravel bike, and I actually liked it. I actually liked it a lot. And I was like, man, I wonder if this could be kind of sick on a cross course. Like it's heavy and people would just like lose their mind. But I mean, honestly, keep pushing the boundaries of like what every discipline is and how fast you can go and what you can do. So, I mean, I don't know if a fork and a dropper make you go faster, then I guess just, send it. I guess at the very tippy top, at the fastest bit, like we said, the traction's the holding back bit, but below that, I do think all these things probably, like you said, could actually make you go faster. So it'd be something to play with if you have one.
Yeah, I like that idea too. That's cool.
All right. One more equipment question before we do another longer format one. But Tobin, tire inserts on cyclocross bikes, yes or no?
Ooh.
Absolutely. I think running inserts on a tubeless cross tire is like, I think that's the ticket. Yeah, because if you're not running tubulars, you're running tubeless. And the biggest downfall of a tubeless clincher is probably your ability to run really low pressure. And an insert is going to let you run really low pressure. It's going to keep a little bit of pressure, not like PSI pressure, just like pressure on the outsides of that tire, so it doesn't get so like squirmy in the corners. So I think that an insert lets you run low pressure like you would in a tubular without burping and without pinching. So I think that without a doubt, if you're running tubeless, inserts are something that you want to be maybe playing with if you haven't before. At least maybe putting one in the back just to see how it feels. But yeah, I've still got tubulars. I still race on tubulars, but there's been points where I've thought about like how easy it would be to not be gluing all these wheels every year.
Yeah.
And traveling with, 7 sets of wheels or whatever. And I think that an insert with a good tubeless tire is probably the next best thing to a tubular. And we're getting close to like that performance. It is close, but in a game of percents and everything, it's still probably not quite there. And then to, I guess, backtrack a little bit on a dry course or like a somewhat tacky course, I think they're pretty similar. But on like a mudder where you're running 19 PSI on a 33 millimeter tubular, I don't know, that tubular tire is so soft and it moves so much in the mud that I haven't ridden them side by side, but I'd imagine a mud tubular still outperforms a mud clincher with an insert any day on a really bad muddy race.
Mm-hmm.
Tobin, you mentioned that like you run tubulars, but do you know what inserts you would run if you were running inserts with clinchers?
Yeah, I got to do this year, so that was my follow-up question.
Well, yeah, so I've ridden a lot of different inserts. I've ridden, like Cush Core, 2.0 Light, Tanis, Vittoria, and I feel like right now the Tanis insert is really nice. The shape of it, all these inserts are kind of different shapes, which is cool. It's cool and it's overwhelming. What's that?
Tanis? How do you spell that?
Tannus.
Nice.
And that's what Keegan and I have been running those on the gravel bikes as well. But anyways, it's a 33 to like a 40. I'm not sure the max size, but the smallest size they recommend running it on is a cyclocross tire. And I feel like putting that insert in a smaller tire makes it work even better because it's taking up even more volume in that tire, and it's really keeping the bead on and supporting the sidewalls nicely. So I don't know. I think those inserts are running really well. And like to circle back to Downieville, I rode those inserts at 19 and 20 PSI. I'm 173 pounds, so that's kind of absurdly low pressure. And the tire
for that course in particular,
Yeah.
Yep.
And that tire was really well supported. It, the top was nice and soft. It's like adding volume reducers to your tires is, I don't know, kind of how I see it. So yeah, there's a lot of options out there for everyone. So yeah, I don't know, cool. something to play with.
Yeah, it's so chaotic what I do to have bring extra tires to a race and then decide what is going to happen the morning of and make sure that and just set up tires there. But man, I do not want to fly with like an extra bike bag just filled with like 4 other sets of wheels. I hate it.
It's a pain. Also, another thing with inserts is you can ride a flat. If your tubeless tire goes flat, there's a good chance that thing's going to rip off the rim, because if you think about, you got your tubeless tire, you've got sealant inside of it. It's basically like almost lubricated from the inside of it. So once that thing starts moving and a little bit of sealant gets in there, like it just wants to rip off the rim. An insert keeps the tire pressed where it's supposed to be, and you can actually ride an insert pretty fast with a flat, and it protects your rim, lets you get to the pit, lets you finish the race, whatever it is, or maybe lets you just ride a bit of single track till you feel like you're in a strategically like a better spot to fix your flat tire.
Nice.
Yeah. This is awesome. Really good info for it. I have some Tubolite inserts for like road style tires, and I've wanted to put them in on the road and then do like a rolling resistance test to see if I can see if there's any difference between the two. But I like that idea even on the road because of the fact that like if I hit a huge pothole in a race or something like that, or just not even a race, just anyway, it would probably stop me from having a pinch flat. And then also like, just like you said, Tobin, I've had situations where like you get a blowout, like an actual boom, your tire's flat on a downhill on a road bike, and it happened on the front tire. Yeah. It was terrifying. Like I thought that I was going to die. I was on a mountain pass road with like a cliff on one side. It was terrible. And if I had inserts, it would probably give me a bit of insurance to be able to safely slow down and not have to worry about just instantly, my tire rolling off the rim and me crashing really hard. So. Yeah,
I think inserts are super valuable for that. Like I've had a similar thing happen, like a blowout on the back and the tire, blow out and then it blew off. It completely like came off the bead. I don't want to be like scaring people, but like this could in like a freak scenario, like an insert could really save you. And I was thinking about maybe running them on like my road race wheels, because an insert is hard to change. So on a training wheel, it would kind of be a bummer to be out there and have an insert. You like flat your tubeless tire, you got to put a tube in, you got to take your insert out. Now you're 30, 40 miles from home and you got this insert covered in sealant. Like,
we're like a bandolier or something.
Yeah, like I'm not going to lie. If that happens to me, I'm leaving the insert. Like I'm stashing it. I'll come back and get it in my car later and take it home because I don't want to carry it.
Yeah, for sure. This is cool. Super good info. I like it. I'm going to pull an audible, and we're just going to do one more like longer form one. Then we'll go back to the short stuff.
Cool. Okay.
I liked what we were doing on the short stuff.
Do you want to do Miles' question?
Yeah, Miles. Yeah, awesome. Exactly. You feel me.
Cool.
So Miles says, hello, I have a question on the topic of XCO race starts. No matter which Tobin also races XCO and cyclocross and Unbound at the whole entire spectrum. So we have a broad spectrum here. No matter what I do.
No, Toby. You won podium at a road race like yesterday.
Yeah, won an XCO, won a US Cup last year.
That's true. I guess I've won a bit of everything.
Yeah, Tobin. Don't
Yeah, there was
discredit
the
yourself.
year of cyclocross where he just won everything and just like couldn't
Everything?
lose. Like, yeah.
Fair enough.
No matter what I do, I never feel like I have a high power off the line. It feels like there is some sort of block limiting me from really going all out. I've had the best success with the paw raw warm up on TrainerRoad, and that's a warm up that basically has you. It's kind of similar to like a typical warm up format where you have like it's an effort that's going to keep you around tempo to sweet spot, and then like something that's a little closer to threshold. And then after that, shorter, harder efforts. And that one has quite a few little short, like almost like anaerobic little short efforts that you do beforehand.
Yeah.
So that's what they're talking about there. Okay, so they've had the best luck with that, but they still don't feel great. I've experimented with nutrition and no longer do caffeine before races. Despite all this, I don't feel good until about 15 minutes into the race. Do you think I'm making a mistake regarding warm-up or nutrition, or is it just pre-race nerves? Thanks. And then this is a really important detail. Miles says, if it helps, I'm 15 years old and have an FTP of 271 at 59 kilograms. So Miles is racing the absolute fastest starters on the planet. Bless you, Miles, for having to deal with junior racers and how hard they start. Miles is at 4.6 watts per kilo, but it doesn't trend normally in terms of these short, hard efforts. They just start so hard. Kids can they can just push it to absolutely different levels. Ivy, what are your thoughts when you see this one first?
Yeah, I mean, Miles is obviously very strong, but I think, and Tobin can maybe confirm or deny this, but I just feel like XC starts, like cyclocross starts, like that's something that you need to train, not only from like a skill practice aspect, but it's something you need to emulate in your training to do. And there are very intentional workouts that are done to train this system where you do a really high intensity effort and then settle into a like VO2 max or threshold pace, like a tough pace. So it's something that needs to be physiologically trained before race day. Otherwise, yeah, you're going to feel really bad for the first 15 minutes of the race if you do a hard effort and try to settle into race pace, and that's not something that you're used to.
Yeah.
This is when I'm looking at this, I'm thinking of Ivy. I'm thinking of they're called float sets in TrainerRoad or reduced amplitude billats after Dr. Billat. But those are like ones where you surge and you do really high VO2 or anaerobic. Then after that, you settle into somewhere around threshold-ish pace and you repeat those sort of efforts. Or you can look at hard starts where you start out with something that's really high VO2 or anaerobic for something like 30 seconds to a minute. And then after that, what you do is you settle into threshold or sweet spot for a long time. It's really hard training, but it's the sort of thing that you see in the cross-country marathon or cross-country Olympic or even cyclocross plans. They prepare you for it, but you can also use alternates, like Ivy said, and just, intentionally drive your training that way on a VO2 day or on a threshold day and do those for sure. Ivy, just add some. Yeah.
Well, that workout style too is, it's like pretty common. Like my coach has me do one. It's like a 30-second sprint, 3 minutes at like a high tempo, 1 minute off. And you might do 6 to 8 of those in a row. You might do like a set of 6 to 8 with an endurance block and then another set. Like you might do 3 sets of those in the day of a 3-4 hour ride. And like he's like almost calls them like draining the bathtub. Like you're trying to make your drain bigger to like, flush these legs. So you're packing them up with a 30-second sprint, 3 minutes at your tempo or whatever. And then that 1 minute off, and you're just trying to get your body to be more efficient at like flushing, hard effort, flush, because that's what these races are.
Mm-hmm. When I'm looking at this, so I ran numbers on this, Miles, and I looked back at what I have to do, and I have to race these juniors at short track locally, and they hold for the first
strong.
Yo, they're so strong. I don't get it. So like for the first 5 minutes of the race, it's 6 watts per kilo or above, like for sure, for the first 5 minutes of every race. So putting that in terms of like what you would have to do for 6 watts per kilo for the first 5 minutes, I'm going to do some math here. That would be like 350, a little over 350 watts that you would have to expect to like, quote, average or normalize power for the first 5 minutes of some sort of effort. That's the sort of like hard start that we're talking about here that likely Miles is up against. So it's not normal, like for all of us, middle-aged punters that are at our races, like, and somebody starts hard. It's not quite the same as when a junior field starts hard. That's a totally different world. So, and while I say for the first 5 minutes for doing that, for the first 1 minute, they're at like 30 watts per kilo. It's absurd. So really strong and hard hitting starts is what Miles is having to deal with. Tobin, how do you deal with this? Because there's probably a bit of a misnomer thinking that cyclocross is just punching nonstop, because as you race it and as other really skilled athletes race it, your power profile is actually much smoother than a lot of us average athletes. But racing XCO, and you're dealing with athletes with crazy high watt kgs too, that you're racing against. How do you struggle with hard starts, and have you done anything to help?
I have always been a pretty good starter. I don't know why. It's not, to be totally honest, it's not really something I even train, because I've never saw it as a weakness of mine. But I'm trying to think, a cyclocross start versus an XCO start, it is very similar, like it's crucial. So you start, and you got to make sure you're in the right gear. They blow the whistle, you got to hit your pedal, and then you got to be in a good position going into that first corner, wherever that might be. I do find that the beginning of like cyclocross is like really hard start, and then settles at like temp or like threshold, and you're just like rolling threshold, and it's going to punch out some corners hard. XCO feels way more violent to me than cyclocross. I do think XCO is probably the most painful and maybe hardest effort, because it is so stabby. It's like you're on a bike with heavy tires, a lot of rolling resistance. So you start super hard, you hit that first corner, you slow down a bunch, you punch out that super hard. So you're just hitting these like spike after spike after spike after spike. And I do think that maybe that's where some specific maybe work would behoove Miles. Potentially. And then I think the warm-up looks good to me. I don't think that, I think that's I do a similar warm-up. Most people do a very similar warm-up to that, like a build, sharp, tempo, chill. One thing would be to try to do that as close as you can to the start of the race, but at a certain point, you got to be there for staging or whatever it is. So you can only do so much to keep warm after your warm-up. That being said, if you are at a cold race, if you can find yourself some tights that zip off, so you can put them on after the trainer, and they zip up the sides. They're not leg warmers. These are kind of a nerdy cyclocross thing that not many people know about, but they're like, they have zippers from the ankle to the hip. So you don't have to take your shoes off or anything. You can put them on after the trainer, or on the trainer, go to the start line, and then when they say 3 minutes to go, 2 minutes to go, you can take these things off, throw them to your person, and you've had a pretty heavy thermal pair of basically like tights on, which also helps stay warm. But I think maybe it's just, if maybe some on off work would probably help this feeling, help it suck a little bit less.
Yeah. I'm looking at this, and where Miles says, despite all this, I don't feel good until about 15 minutes into the race. So Miles, in this case, you kind of feel blocked, like you can't go all out off a start, but then you feel good 15 minutes in. And if I'm honest, that's probably the inflection point where a lot of people start to feel really bad in a race. So and that's where they start to drop down. There's two main inflection points that I've seen in a race. It's 15 to 20 minutes, and then it's somewhere around an hour. And those are typically the points where people really start to, their performance changes. Either they pace conservatively and the cream is going to rise up because everybody else is dropping down, or it's a situation where you went out really hard and, like the bell tolls, and what you've done is what you've done, and you got to answer for it. So in one respect, Miles, like there's some people that just are never good with starting hard. I'm thinking of like Julian Absalon, for example, was never an athlete that...
Jamie Driscoll, sorry to interrupt, but like reliably bad starter could still win the bike race.
Yep. Jeff Kabush is another athlete that I think of that's always famous for being stronger toward the end. And so Miles, like this may be something where like your VO2 on kinetics and like a lot of complicated things that are going on in your body, they just operate differently than other people. So instead of constantly trying to fight that, which you might find, and by all means, try to fight it and try to like train specifically like Tobin's saying and try to prepare yourself to do this. But if you find over time that no matter what you do, it just doesn't change that, then you might be the sort of athlete that actually ends up being it's kind of fun. You end up being a reaper, right? Like you don't start as hard, but you know that in every race, you are going to get stronger and stronger and stronger and pick people off as you go through the field. So there's like and this is really tricky though, if you're in a race where you have to fight for position and if you're back, like it's going to cost you time. It's not ideal. But it absolutely is a strategy that a lot of riders can work with with a lot of success too. Ivy, I don't know if you have any input on that, but.
I mean, I think the only other thing that this could be is not a training or fitness thing at all. Like we could be telling Miles to do these workouts and change these aspects of training that Miles might totally already be doing. And this could absolutely be like a race anxiety thing. Like starts are stressful. And actually, it was Tobin. It was you last year, Tobin. That oh my gosh, it was so like it was like a funny moment for me. I don't know who we were with, but you're like, yeah, Ivy, I don't know why you're not better at cross because you're really strong and you steer your bike really well. So I don't know, that's pretty weird. And I was like, dang, dude. But that's like totally something that
sheepish look from Tobin.
I mean, it's true, you know. Podcast over. No, it was coming from a place of caring. It's fine. But like it is totally true. Like, and it was super frustrating for me to feel that way during the season and get so, and it kind of compounded and I would get stressed out about starting and I would have bad start positions or, you know, get the random luck of the draw and get a good one. And then I put a bunch of pressure on myself and be like, oh my gosh, I need to make the most out of this good call-up spot. And then would just get so stressed out about starting that, like wouldn't ride well as a result. And then if the first like few turns didn't go the way I wanted to, I would just like kind of spiral and like never get out of it and just feel like stressed. And then like halfway through the race, I'd be like, okay, well, this is where I'm at, and then start riding better, you know? So this could for Miles totally be, feels like Miles might be fixating on how hard starts are and that they're not good at starts, and it might be compounding, you know?
Yeah. I have an XCO strategy that Keegan told me that actually worked really well. So, you know, Keegan's starting was when he was doing XCO, starting back at the grid at these XCO races. I too was starting there when we started doing more of these, and I didn't have any points after COVID. And even when I did have points, you know, I was only like, I wasn't really a front row start. So a strategy that has worked well for me and, you know, seems like it's worked really well for other people I've told is, now everyone's going to know this, but he generally, XCO has a really short start lap, you know, like a quick 3-4 minute lap. And then you go out for the entire lap and then the race is on. Is start as hard as you can, you know, pass as many people as possible in the start lap and ride, you know, for, you know, lack of a better term, like a kind of in the start lap. But once you're on the first lap of that race, everyone is they're still trying to make up those spots that they think they should, they're still trying to pass everywhere, right? And they're just shooting, they're burning so many matches to make one pass only to be repassed by 2 people the second it opens up. So what I've always tried to do is, like I said, hit that first start loop as aggressive as possible, elbows out, take every corner, take as many positions as you can. And then on that first lap, kind of accept where you are, settle in, only make passes that are easy passes to make. And then come second lap, people are going to be absolutely destroyed that have have ridden poorly on that first lap and made a lot of dumb passes and burnt a lot of matches. And that second lap is where you can like really, really, really start to do some damage and put people away and potentially get up to the front of the race. And it takes patience. You do have to accept kind of where you are. But every time I've actually stuck to that plan, when I haven't had a great starting position, at least, I've ended up with a result. So that's another thing, like we were with the Downieville question, is like doing what you can do and accepting where you are at that time, and then making it count on that second lap when people are paying for their first lap, like overexertions.
Takes a lot of confidence in your fitness to race that way, for sure.
It does. Yeah, it really does. But that's just, maybe it's a tactic, like, especially in junior racing. I think a lot of these kids just go absolute bananas on the first lap, and like you see some guys going backwards real quick after. So being able to hold it back and then make it count on that second lap can be a good strategy too. These are all just different ideas to play with. But yeah. Another thing is too, if you're not, if you feel like if you feel like you're getting into your pedal really quick and you're good at that, then you can't train that obviously. But if you feel like you're fumbling that pedal and you're missing that pedal, if you hit your pedal immediately, like you're gonna have a good start. You can just tell. You hit it and it goes clip, and you're like, boom, I'm gonna take the whole shot. If you're slipping and sliding and you have to stay seated for like 5 seconds while you're fishing for the cleat, I mean that really like kills your start. So that would be a non-fitness thing that you can train. Just literally like line up and just start at a stop and just like in your mind say go and hit the pedal, and then stop and then say go, and like just get that muscle memory of where your cleat is and where your pedal are.
And making sure you're in the right gear.
Gear too, very important.
That's huge. Yeah.
Yeah.
One actionable way to accomplish what Tobin was saying, if like go really hard on the start lap or the first lap and then settle in on the second, that I've heard Keegan do is Keegan's like, all right, my start position is X, and my goal by the end of the start lap is to be X minus 10. Like I'm just going to make up 10 spots. I'm not going to put pressure on myself to hold at the front or do anything else other than just pick off 10 athletes over the course of this one. And the interesting thing is that in some cases he'd pick off 10 athletes. I'm just using this number arbitrarily, but pick off 10 athletes. And after that was like, all right, I'm in position, but then wouldn't start reaching for more, would just be like, that's okay. I am where I am, like Tobin said. And then after that, because they weren't just, killing themselves for every single spot, they were then able to move up further up through the field. So that's a really helpful way too, Miles. If you're able to kind of figure out positions and you look at the start and you're 20th, you can say, okay, by the end of the start, my goal is to be in 15th. And then after that, then I can reassess. And after lap 1, my goal is to make up 2 more positions and then 2 more positions or something else. But you can make it really objective like that and make it manageable, make it smaller at first so you can get practice at like just really intentionally ticking off positions and maintaining positions. And then you can move up. Like, all of us, unless Miles, you are like, you're battling with one other person for a national championship title and you're going for that. Otherwise, you have every single race is just an opportunity for you to improve and for you to like throw things at the wall and see what sticks. So in that case, you should be looking at this like, okay, maybe next week I can make up 4 positions instead of 2 on that lap. And you just constantly work at it. So good advice. Mm-hmm. All right, Ivy, let's go into the fast ones.
Yeah, we'll just.
Then I have some personal cross questions, if that's okay.
Wow.
Ask that stuff. Yeah. So.
Okay, Tobin, what do you think are the best pedals when it's muddy, and what are the worst?
Good question.
I feel bad slandering a brand or some brands, but
I have not ridden a ton of different pedals personally. That being said, I've never ridden an SPD. I've always been on like a Crank Brothers or a Time, which has like, just like a sprung cage that you're clipping into. I've really never had issues in the mud with a pedal like that. I feel like SPDs, I'll see people kicking at their pedal and whatnot. A lot of people think SPD gives you the best platform, but I think that comes with the best platform. It means their surface area, which means that can hold mud. So I think that those bigger, like more positive feeling pedals do hold a bit more mud in them. But at the end of the day, if it's muddy and it's grass and there's hay and stuff and little rocks, like that's going to jam up every pedal, but it will jam up some worse than others. And I don't know, just like maybe I've seen SPDs pack a little bit worse than like a Time or a Crank Brothers, but hard to say. I think if you want the best pedal for mud, only a Crank Brothers egg beater is going to be near impossible to beat in the mud.
Mm-hmm. Flat pedals or the mud best.
Flats.
Yes.
Checkers.
Done.
We were playing checkers over here. Ivy's playing chess.
I'm gonna say the worst. I think are probably speed plays in the mud.
Oh yeah,
the little disc.
The speed play mountain bike pedal.
Yeah,
I didn't even know that was a thing anymore.
I don't know if they make them anymore, but I know they did, and they were known for. I think it was like a metal incompatibility, where it was like the metal itself, like one metal was different, or the cleat was a different material than the pedal, which is usually the case. But when they got any sort of dirt or corrosion on them, it was like, congrats, you've accomplished welding without a welder. And it was just like you were stuck. Like you just like, yeah, it was hard to get out. So yeah. I wanted to try Time pedals recently just because of I see them. It's an option to try. I used Crank Brothers for some time early on, and I had some really terrifying unintentional exits on those that were like my foot would just blow out. And it was terrifying. And I should take ownership. It was my fault. If I was a better rider, it wouldn't have happened. But sometimes you buy equipment because it makes up for your insufficiencies. And an SPD, I feel really locked in on the mountain bike. But for cross, yeah, you're unclipping and clipping in so much. I might want to go with something that has just the spring-loaded kind of bar system like that you see on those in Crank Brothers. So
yeah, I'm ride or die for Time off-road. Love it.
Really?
Yeah, totally. They're great.
Huh.
I'm also on Times. No issues really.
Nice.
Time's a good. It's a good middle ground between like the extreme of clearance being a Crank Brothers egg beater and the biggest platform being like an SPD. I think Time does a nice job coming in there in the middle, feeling very like a big positive platform while still using like the bar retention system that sheds mud well. Yeah, happy medium.
Big fan. John, we have a rapid fire for you. What about Xterras? More of these in the future? Because you're a big tri guy now and a big off-road guy. So what's up?
Yeah. So I was going to do Xterra Lake Tahoe, but I don't like to race on Sundays. Like that's my day to not be selfish, and racing for me is like super selfish. And I've broken that rule a couple times this year, and Xterra Lake Tahoe's on Sunday. So I'm not sure I'm going to do it. So I might do like a pirate race sort of thing where like on Saturday I just go up and they'll probably have the course marked and I'll just like do my own deal. And honestly, like in a triathlon with where I'm at anyway, it is a solo endeavor. It's not like I'm like battling for the front or something. So probably won't even be that different. I'll just get punched less in the swim, which would be sweet. So, I'm okay with that. But in terms of training though, I just laid out my training for the next like 6 months, and I'm going to be swimming and running every week in addition to training on the bike. I just love how it makes me feel like, general life. And even on the bike, I feel like really strong. And I hadn't ran for 6 weeks and I just ran, and dear me, it hurt. So, I don't want to do that again either. I want to get to the point where I'm still continually doing that, but yeah. So, I mean, I will, and I would love to go to Xterra Worlds. That's like a personal goal that I'd like to do. I have a lot of work in the swim to get to the point where I might qualify, but who cares? Like I'd show up and I would just be so far off the back at a world championship field. So, but I'm driven to get there. At some point I do want to race Xterra Worlds, and it'd be really cool if I could like age group top 10 or something. That would be a huge accomplishment for me. So
nice.
I will.
Cool. We support you.
Thanks. Thanks, Ivy. Because I'm like us. I'm publicly shamed by many, so I appreciate the support. So, Yeah.
All right. How do you guys pick all-around tires to use for both cyclocross and gravel?
For both?
Yeah.
I mean, if you're looking for like a good all-around tire, I do think anything with like kind of like a semi-slick center with side knobs is pretty hard to beat. Like it really does everything quite well, especially in gravel. You know, they make that for, I wouldn't necessarily say the same for cross if you could only have one, because that, like a file tread with knobs on the side is like I really like a tire like that. But if it gets a little bit wet, it can be a handful. So I'd say for gravel, I think you're not racing in mud very often. So I absolutely think you can get away with like a pretty non-aggressive center with knobs on the side and be really happy with that. And it's a pretty fast tire. For cyclocross, I think if we break tires into 3 categories, you have like a file tread, an intermediate, and a mud tire. If you choose that intermediate tire, like a Griffo or like a Typhoon style tire, it's really good at everything. So if you can only have one, an intermediate's good for cross. And for gravel too, like although I said a slick with like semi-slick with side knobs is pretty good, I do think the same, like an intermediate style tire for gravel, you're also going to be pretty much fine in everything. It really is a do-it-all tire. So like a Rambler kind of tire or something.
Totally.
I'd stay away from the extremes though. Like it's really easy when you're coming off a mountain bike too to be like, I'm going to ride, you see cross tires and they look so scary. They're small. There's no knobs. And you're like, I'm going to ride a mud tire because it looks aggressive. I would try to stay away from like going for an aggressive tire just because it looks good and it looks not scary, because they're just really, really slow. And I don't even think they hook up that well if it's dry. So don't be fooled by the aggressive looking tires. They have a time and a place, but it's not for everyday riding.
That's good advice. Yeah, I think the person riding this wants to have one bike set up and just like put on a set of tires for the year and have them be just on there for all of gravel and all of cyclocross. And I think that just comes with some compromise. You know, it's not going to be, if you do something, I agree, you should do something like an intermediate tread. And that means that it won't always be perfect in gravel and it won't always be perfect in cross either. But if you want to have the ease of just one setup, you're going to have to make a couple compromises. What do you think, John?
Yeah, if you're really comfortable.
A 38 too maybe would be good. Maybe not a full-on 40 millimeter tire. If you were looking to maybe a 36 or 38 millimeter tire would be a nice across the board size.
Because for local races, there won't be a UCI official checking your tires. Yeah.
They better not get out of here. Yeah. I agree. And I think that if you have really good bike skill, like Tobin said, and Ivy, you could probably use the intermediate or a file tread. If you have really good bike skill, I would lean toward the file tread. If you are less confident on the bike, I would lean toward the intermediate. That's all I have to add to it. You guys have had great advice.
Yeah, good point.
All right. Cyclocross question. How do you work on exiting a corner with speed and being smooth too? Those are a good question. Feel synonymous. I mean, I feel like the only way to really work on those things though is to unfortunately find your limit, practice cornering at speed and be ready to put a foot out when you lose it,
Yeah.
Isn't so much of this about the entry too? Like I know that we're focusing on the exit here with this question of like, how do you exit a corner with speed and being smooth? But at least in my mind, I'm going toward, okay, well, what happens leading up to it? Mm-hmm. I don't know, Tobin, what your thoughts are, but.
I think the same. I think, with cross, it's easy to get a little short-sighted racing and not think, like, you got to be looking really far ahead. You got to be looking at who's in the corner with you, how they entered the corner, where you're entering the corner. It sounds silly, but if I think watching motorcycle racing is actually really helpful for stuff like this, MotoGP and Supercross, like dirt bike racing. You can really see how different people enter and exit a corner and how passes are made in a corner, where the fastest line is. but defensive lines, offensive lines, all these different things, but to not get too carried away. I think that entering a corner at the right speed is important. You're asking a lot of your tires in a corner, so any last minute braking is asking even more of your tire, and that's when you'll see people slide out, lose a front tire, rear tire, whatever. And then cyclocross, I find, actually has pretty limited lines in corners, especially after so many people have ridden the course. So there might be 2 lines through a corner, and you might just want to look at both of those and see where they run you out of the corner. But I really think it is kind of a hard answer. But going with the right speed is the first thing. Don't make any sudden movements in the corner. Look all the way through the corner, and then, spend time on your cross bike. Maybe you go set up some cones in the field or whatever and just rip around. And because bike handling is not something you can train like fitness. You just have to go out and do it. There's no way to become better at cornering unless you are spending time cornering.
Mm-hmm. What you said about those lines through corners that develop throughout the day too. You might pre-ride the day before or early in the morning and think you have an idea of what the fastest line will be and how to set up to carry the most speed through, and it might get rutted or like burned in throughout the day, and there might be less traction, and it may no longer be the fastest line, And so I think you have to be heads up about how courses change throughout the day to make sure you're not what was once the fast line is no longer, and but you see that it's burned in, you're like, oh, this is where everyone else is riding, this is still the fastest line, and it might not be.
And similar to that with mud, in particular, mud is slippery. That should be the title of the podcast. When you're in a corner in a muddy cross race, look in this is crucial in muddy crosses, looking for grass, like looking for green bits, looking for stuff that hasn't been ridden, because that's where the traction is. So just because, there's that 10-inch strip where everyone's been riding, maybe you're at that 11th and 12th inch where there actually is still a little bit of greenery, because that's where it's not just going to be super slippery. So thinking just because in a muddy race, the fastest, like outside, inside, outside apex, traditional apex through the corner is this burnt in line, you can actually get through it way fast if you just stay outside of that line on the green grass, because you can, carry a lot of speed because you have a lot of traction in that.
Super good advice. Anything to add, John?
Now the pros have shared their advice, I'll just jump in with like some average Joe unqualified advice. But like one thing that I've found that helps me is, so this actually I had like an epiphany while watching Tobin, actually. I think it was at like, I don't know if it was a race in the Bay Area or one of the ones that they had in Reno way back in the day, but there was a turn, and I remember going into the turn that I was like braking into this turn and then accelerating coming out of it. And I remember watching Tobin go through it, and there was no braking whatsoever. And he was rolling through the turn with a lot of speed. And then that was like the first step in me realizing the fact that like, so for motocross, it's really different than MotoGP in a lot of ways. Like in motocross, there's this whole concept of digging for speed. And I've mentioned this before on the podcast, but it's like, can I go 1 foot further into the turn while being wide open? And like and particularly with how bikes used to be when they were 2 strokes, you were either gas or you were brake, and there was nothing in between. You were never coasting. And so I have this mentality where I'm always trying to push deeper into every turn. But that usually ends up making for a slower speed through the middle of the turn, and then in turn a slower exit out of the turn, unless everything is dialed in and you're perfect on a dirt bike. And on a bicycle, it's just not the same. So instead, I was accelerating really hard and trying to hold a bunch of speed pedaling while I saw Tobin coast into the turn instead of slamming on the brakes and roll coming out. Since I was having to slam on the brakes, it messed up my line. I had to take a different line, and then I couldn't carry it. So there's this whole concept of amateurs race cyclocross with surges and punches that the best riders don't. The best riders are smoothing out all the efforts, and they're carrying more speed throughout things. And sorry, there's a really loud lawnmower directly outside my window, and I hope that doesn't come through on the podcast.
I had one of those earlier. I had to mute.
But I think that a great way for turns in particular is stop trying to surge into your turns. And some turns you do have to brake, particularly if it's downhill coming into it. But if it's slightly uphill or if it's flat coming into it, you might actually be able to brake less, roll through the turn, not like in stepping further back. It's don't feel like you have to sprint as hard as you can coming into the turn. Don't feel like you need to slam on your brakes, and then don't feel like you need to reaccelerate. Instead, it's about coming in with slightly less, but preserving more of that momentum. And it makes it so that energy-wise, man, that makes it so easy to carry a higher pace around that course. So just the smoothness, and particularly Tobin, you've always been a really, really smooth cyclocross rider too. It's been fun to watch and really educational to watch how you ride. So
that's a good concise answer, actually, though. What you just said is smoothness, going in at a manageable speed and carrying that speed through, because what makes you fast is exit speed, not entry speed with bikes, especially when you don't have a throttle, so
yeah,
going in and hitting, whatever apex there might be, and then just rolling out, still carrying that speed that you carried into it, is how you can carry more speed through the corners and then fatigue yourself less sprinting out of it, because you're already at a decent speed while you've exited the corner.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is going in with too much speed is not better. More speed, not better.
Yeah, I think, manageable speed is what you want. Totally.
Cool. Tobin, what are the best drills to get ready for single speed cyclocross? Are you racing single speed cross world championships in Santa Cruz?
I sure am.
Nice.
Well, yeah, the best drills for single speed racing, huh? How
just
quick
like glute and core exercise.
How quick can you drink a beer? How quick can you open a can? I'm trying to think, but was this question really a single speed question?
Yeah.
Huh. I actually think even this is a good question to ask after the cornering question, because I think conservation of momentum is even more important on a single speed, because you're never going to be in the right. You're in the right gear for like a couple seconds all the time here and there, where like you're getting up to speed, then you're like, oh, this feels great, and then you're like, oh, this feels bad again. But I feel like core, like some good core work is good, because you're really just like grinding a gear sometimes, and maybe some cadence work, because sometimes you're just like pedaling so fast. But I think honestly, good drills is like anything where you feel fluid and smooth is going to help you go fast on a single speed, because if you're doing that light switch riding, like on the pedals, off the pedals, on the pedals, off the pedals, that's going to make it really challenging. So skills work, I think, is going to be the answer there.
I know for me too, refamiliarizing myself with that moment when you are riding up something that's super steep and knowing when is the moment that running will be faster, and getting really fluid at that, and knowing exactly when to do that is really key
before
for
you're
single
stopped.
speed. Exactly.
Yeah, that's a good point. Just like, where is my momentum? How do I keep my body moving fast, even if I have to like keep, get off the bike and put it next to me? Mm-hmm. That's a really good point, because like you see even on a non-geared race, a lot of people just don't know when to give up, and like it's not giving up. It's just like, this is that's why cross is so unique. Like you just, there's a point where it's faster to just get off the bike. So knowing when to do that instead of that point where you've come to like a complete stop, because that's really slow, and then again you've killed all your momentum.
Totally. Yep. Practice that stuff for single speeders. Johnny, got anything?
No, absolutely nothing. So zero experience. I support you in your answers.
All right, last one. This is great for you, Tobin, because I think you started racing pretty young. This person wrote, my daughter, age 12, just joined a cyclocross team for the first time. Best ways I can support her? What do you think? Because you were a junior.
Best way to support her. Buy her 3 matching bikes, 8 sets of tubulars. No, just kidding. Cross can be I think an intimidating discipline because there is so much gear required. People say required. Don't fool yourself. You can show up with 1 bike and be totally fine. So, I've done cross camps, I've coached cross camps where everyone's like, you need this, you need that, you need this. I think, showing up with a bike that is running well is the first thing. If you don't know, if she doesn't know how to work on her bike, help her, make sure her bike's running well is the main thing. Mm-hmm. And, honestly, just getting her to races. Like, that's all. Having your parents there to drive you to the race and have some snacks, it makes it a bit easier. I mean, because then once you get racing, like, you're out there, you're going. Try to control those variables that you can control before the race is going. And, that is my bike running well? How do my tires look? Do I need new tires? Do my tires have any damage? Yeah, like, what else? Yeah, it's not hard. Yeah, and it doesn't have to be hard. Just show up with that bike that's running well and just race. And yeah, it's a funny question because I guess it's a really simple answer. Is like, how do you support them like you would anywhere else, I guess. But make sure their bike's running well. And if you're, the parent driving the race, make sure you have plenty of time when you get there. Because there's nothing worse than like showing up too close to the start and panicking. It's not good for anybody.
Totally. I agree with all that. And I think the only thing that I would add is, I can't imagine being a parent with a kid racing like one of the toughest disciplines. And I think as a parent, I would be prepared to hold some space for like broken spirits when every once in a while, like, you see kids racing cross on a really muddy day, just like trying to lug around their 30-pound bike that's just covered in mud, and they just look like just so cracked and sad and not having fun. And I'm sure that's pretty hard to see and experience as a parent and know how to make it a positive experience for them. It's got to be tough.
Could I add one thing to this?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
I think cyclocross is unique in the sense that it can be more about fun than any other discipline that you do in cycling, because of the fact that like it's balance and silly drills that you're having fun in the grass, and just like grab a 2x4 and put it in the grass and ride on it. Go to a park and like go have fun at the park and just like set up cones and do silly little drills. And they're so directly applicable to cyclocross and they aren't elsewhere. And that's where, so let's just say you're doing enduro. Like when you're doing enduro, you kind of need to be training. It's on the fitness side. It's like those hard on-offs and then pairing it with longer days. And then you need to be working on technical skills on really pretty intimidating terrain.
Yeah.
Cyclocross, on the other hand, like the fitness side of things, especially if they're 12, just let them have fun and ride their bike. That'll take care of the fitness side of things. But the cool part is all the specific skills can be done in such a relaxed, fun way. Like it doesn't have to be something crazy. So I assume that in this case, your daughter also does like other disciplines of cycling as well. And if that's the case, all of this is going to be really refreshing and fun to just like ride your bike in a park and just have fun with it and play around. And if you make that your training for cyclocross, I guarantee you they're going to have a blast, and they're also going to improve a lot, because that's how you build this sort of comfort level on a bike. You get them into a unintimidating environment that isn't a race. It's a park. You do fun, silly things. Keep it fun, I guess. And cyclocross is so easy to keep fun.
That's great advice.
Yeah, that's a good point. You don't need it. It can actually just be that simple. Yeah. And the skills you develop in cross are like these. Anyone that grew up racing cross is like usually a pretty good bike racer. Like Van der Poel and Wout, for example. Like it really gives you is a great foundation for anything else you might do.
you two are examples. I don't want to like put some sort of like pressure of like Vanderpool and Wout, but like Ivy, you race everything. And you're not saying this, I'm saying this. You're good at everything too. Like
Thank you.
Your bike handling is awesome. And
John
Tobin,
out here single-handedly trying to fix my imposter syndrome. Thanks, man.
yeah, I'm here for it. And Tobin, you're the same. Like you might be. I can't think of anybody else in the Lifetime Grand Prix that's like, you know, we're talking like at junior races and cyclocross, like at World Cups, like finishing high up and like. Yeah. You know, been in contention for national championships in cyclocross and also winning pro XCTs. And I don't know, like you two are both really well rounded. And I'm sure that cross has a lot to do with it. So, yeah, it's pretty cool.
I would say cross for sure.
yeah. Tobin, thanks for joining us, man. Where can people find you and follow along with you? We haven't had you on the podcast before, so this is probably exciting for lots of them.
I mean, Instagram. What's as per usual? I'm at McTobin with 3 B's, MCTUBBBIN. That's a story for a different day. But at McTobin. That's me on Instagram. And I try to
we'll link that down below. Current. Santa Cruz Hit Squad is who Tobin rides for. Rafa, SRAM, all the other sponsors of that team. And you can support those sponsors that support athletes like Tobin and go follow his team. His team does a good job of sharing some cool behind the scenes stuff from the races too. And that's
it's pretty fun.
I believe it's just HTSQD on Instagram, but we'll link down below.
Yeah.
And of course, Ivy as well. And Ivy, you're gearing up for cross. Are you racing? Yeah. What are your race plans this year?
Yeah, I have a few tune-up races before the cross season, and then I'll hit I'm going to try to do most of the US UCI ones. I don't know, man. It's scary. Like, cross really, like, damaged my spirit last year, for sure. And maybe the year before. So I'm trying really hard to have enough fitness to have fun, and I think I'm there. And so I'll start with the first block of a few races and see how it goes from there.
Okay, I have one last question, sorry, and then we will really end. You ride for Ventum. The NS1 has big tire clearance. The GS1 obviously is their gravel bike. You could use either. Which one? Funny. I mean, I think you could use either. Which one are you going to choose? Yeah,
I was actually looking at the Geo with this last night, and I could use both. I think with the rake, the head tube angle, and the bottom bracket drop, I'm going to be more comfortable on the GS1 for sure. GS1 is almost identical to a normal cross setup, which I love, except for 5 millimeters of bottom bracket drop, which like I'm not going to notice that.
You might.
Tobin, shush. I don't want to hear that.
Bury your pedal into the grass somewhere. Ask me how I know.
Oh, no. Yeah. So I think if I was on the NS1, I would really do that. And then I worry about mud clearance for the NS1 because I could put 33s in there, 32s, 33s. But if it got muddy, I think it would really pack up just because it would be so close to the frame. So I'm going to do GS1 for cross. It's going to be great.
Cool.
Yeah.
Exciting. Awesome.
And Tobin's not racing cross this year, and I'm pissed.
No, that's not true.
He's going to race some.
The gravel thing goes so late. The gravels this season's way too long. Hot take.
Yeah.
I agree with that, honestly.
We start in March.
It stretches too long.
We end in October. Are you kidding me? It's ridiculous. It's too much, you know. I guess everyone wants a piece of the pie. Everyone wants to put on a gravel race. Everyone wants to charge $300 for a gravel race, and
and get you up at 4 a.m.
Get me up at 4 a.m. Yeah, what? You're gonna charge me $300, and I'm gonna go ride some Forest Service road that you didn't even like.
And be lonely and sad and hurt. Like, what the heck?
Yeah.
That sound you hear is gravel event promoters striking Tobin's name from their list.
Yeah.
You guys seriously, think about how much you're charging for the... Actually, all promoters, bike racing is getting way too expensive, and not really sure why. But
It's a good point, actually. Yeah.
We'll say that. Yeah, I can't wait. Next episode, hot takes and Tobin. Just let her rip, bud.
Oh my God. I am ready for that episode.
All right, everybody. Thanks a bunch. If you enjoyed this episode, it's free. We don't charge anything. We don't even serve ads. If you'd rate the podcast, that'd be hugely helpful. You can do that on Spotify. If you share it with your friends, that's also huge. And if you want to sign up for TrainerRoad, then that makes everything better too, because then that allows us to build more great features and do more exciting things. So do that. Go to TrainerRoad.com or rate the podcast and share it with your friends, and we'll talk to you all next week. Submit your questions at TrainerRoad.com/podcast. Take care.
Bye.